Well, and thank you very much for joining us for the episode of Implementing Artificial Intelligence Optimally in Organizations and Nations here on Amoge Radio Communications. I remain your host, Tolu Madara. Thanking you so much for being with us on this quarter-long journey. How have you been? It's a joy, it's a delight, it's a privilege to be with you again in this final hours of 2026, half year one. Half year one is coming to an end, and we're grateful for the privilege of life. Well, today we are going to conclude on the notes we have been on in the last two episodes. It took some thinking to come to this point, but having reflected and reevaluated and monitored the current ongoings in the world of artificial intelligence, our conclusion is still that it is important to still talk about democratizing artificial intelligence. So we are concluding our program for this quarter. We are concluding this program on the notes we have been on in the last two episodes. So we'll be talking about democratizing artificial intelligence, making the policy a lifeline. I repeat, democratizing artificial intelligence part 3, and the subtitle is making the policy a lifeline. As we always do on this program, we are going to talk about some of the highlights of last episode, right? Some of the highlights of the last episode. So last episode, we had looked at democratized artificial intelligence. It was part 2, but the subtitle was ensuring inclusive and comprehensive technicalities, right? Democratizing artificial intelligence part 2, and the subtitle was ensuring inclusive and comprehensive technicalities, right? I remember starting by saying that leadership is inclusivity, and so democratizing is about ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, right? Everyone's voice must be reflected, everyone's voice must be incorporated, right? And we looked at the technicalities of doing this in artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, like we said in the last episode, has become so defining that we must ensure that the technical processes are inclusive. It's not something that's going to happen by default, right? Artificial intelligence, like we always say on this program and the predecessor programs, generally uses existing data. There's a lot of machine learning from existing data. So there's a lot of high value, high volume, and high velocity data that the machines process, right? And for you to get a machine to think like a human being, to anticipate like a human being, you are going to be using a lot of historical data. And so if this historical data has a certain meaning, for instance, a demographic meaning that is not inclusive, the outcomes or the outputs, let me use the word outputs, the outputs of artificial intelligence when it is queried will definitely lean towards the existing data's demographic biases, right? So we talked a lot about algorithmic bias, which is a natural outflow of bias in the existing data. Algorithmic transparency must be there, and algorithmic equity must be intentionally programmed into artificial intelligence, right? We talked about contextualizing existing international human rights laws as well to ensure that it is as responsive as possible to current artificial intelligence realities. It may be a bit challenging to be starting from scratch if you want to talk about creating, for instance, an artificial intelligence bill of rights, which we think should be created. But while waiting for that, or in the process of creating that, we can contextualize existing human rights and ensure that even the technology leaders, those who are responsible for creating technologies, understand that these are standards which they must abide by. Well, like we always do again, we once again want to invite you, if you're yet to subscribe to our Amoge YouTube page, please do so. Amoge Radio Communications YouTube page, and that way you can always catch up with all of these programs and all of this broadcasts, not just mine, but also that of my colleagues, as well as previous programs that we've done on different themes and topics that are very critical for you to lead your nations, your institutions, your organizations, and definitely your departments as well. Well, today we are going into the final episode of the program, and also the final episode of this segment of the program, which has been on democratizing artificial intelligence. Like I said earlier, now we are looking at policy as a lifeline, democratizing artificial intelligence, part 3, the policy lifeline. Now, when someone is drowning and at sea, usually if you throw them a lifeline and they know how to use that lifeline, they eventually may not drown. So a lifeline is something that people cling to ensure that they can stay alive. It can literally be a lifesaver, right? When they are drowning. Now, I don't think artificial intelligence is the throes of death, but I know that artificial intelligence is certainly being challenged. And part of the things that artificial intelligence is being challenged by include what I would like to call the consequences of not democratizing artificial intelligence adequately. I'm going to say that again. Some of the things that artificial intelligence as a technology is being challenged by are what I would call consequences of not democratizing artificial intelligence sufficiently. Right. Remember, when you talk about democratization, it's about giving everyone a voice and ensuring that everyone's voice is heard. Just like leadership is inclusivity, democratization is definitely inclusivity, and if I may add, comprehensive inclusivity for the sake of emphasis, right? So democratization means that everyone's voice is heard and everyone's voice counts. Very, very, very critical. Now, what is it that artificial intelligence is facing? We've talked about this recently, and we've alluded to it in predecessor programs even before we got to this stage. Artificial intelligence is facing a reputational risk, a huge reputational risk. Generally, the perception of people about artificial intelligence is that it's out to take their jobs, right? So there's the fear of what you may call jobs apocalypse, right? Just like you have the word apocalypse, now they're talking about jobs apocalypse, right? Job apocalypse is seen as something that is looming, right? And it's not coming from nowhere. The artificial intelligence bosses themselves, right? Those who are leading artificial intelligence companies or companies heavily invested in artificial intelligence have gone on and on a lot about the ability of artificial intelligence to take jobs, which is true, right? But it's not just the full truth. There is another side of that truth, which is the fact that, for instance, artificial intelligence can also create jobs. As a matter of fact, for every job that artificial intelligence takes, there's probably the tendency of artificial intelligence to create at least one other job. So it's not necessarily the full truth, it's a partial truth. But artificial intelligence bosses or the leaders of artificial intelligence organizations are spending a lot of time warning about this job apocalypse, right? And sometimes without balancing the other part of it. Now, I'm not going to place the responsibility of not balancing it on them, because that's why today is looking at today's episode is looking at the policy lifeline. Like we said a lot on this program, regulation has a very significant role to play in all of this. Regulation must step up, and not just step in but also step up. Regulation must not just step in but also step up. We've said it repeatedly, policy must be ahead of technology. Policy must connect the missing dots. Policy must make communication comprehensive. Policy must ensure that the reputational risk of artificial intelligence, which can actually be threatening for all of us, is managed. There is a reputational risk, and even though the private sector by default would likely, step in to respond to the threat of reputational risk once it begins to, impact their own profits, the public sector regulation has to be ahead to guarantee that all sectors are protected. It is the responsibility of the public sector to protect the interests of all aspects, of all nuances, of all dynamics, to ensure that we have the optimum, like the title of this program indicates, the optimum benefits from artificial intelligence. We must be able to implement artificial intelligence optimally, not suboptimally, optimally in organizations and nations. And believe me, the sector most responsible for guaranteeing that optimal implementation of artificial intelligence is the public sector. So the policy lifeline has to be given now to ensure that we don't even get to the point where artificial intelligence is drowning at all. But definitely, artificial intelligence is facing a certain level of reputational risk. Let's start with data centers. We've said this a lot in the last 3 months. We've also said it in predecessor programs. So we've been saying this for at least 6 months. Again and again, people do not want to have data centers built anywhere near them. because for a long time, what people have heard is that anytime they have data centers in their environment, is likely to compete with them for electricity resources, including in developed countries. I'm not just talking about developing countries, right? In places like the United States, like Europe, there's been a lot of concern about data centers gobbling, the electricity resources. So those who are, antagonizing data centers believe that they are protecting not just jobs, but they are also protecting their electricity resources. However, just like I said earlier about the job apocalypse, unfortunately, this may just be a partial truth, right? Because as it is, there have actually been progress, right? There has been improvement in electricity management for data centers. So as it is right now, it's being said that the amount of water that data centers take is probably comparable to what a golf course would take, right? Where you go to play your golf. It's no longer at the beginning where initially it was taking a lot of water. We know in terms of electricity demand, we know for a fact that there's been some improvement such that there is more efficiency, right? Even in the amount of water that data centers take for electricity. However, the perception may not be moving with the speed of the facts. I need to say that again. The perception may not be moving with the speed of the facts, right? So unfortunately, it could be that there is more rumor. There are more rumors out there than there are facts. So where you have data centers, making the people concerned and sometimes antagonistic because of the fear that it's going to take away the water, right? It's going to impact the environment. It's important to counter those perceptions with facts that modern data centers do not take up more than other industries, and sometimes not as much as you find being taken in electricity golf courses. Not as much water as those electricity golf courses are taken in places like the United States. But this how will I put it now? This advocacy, right, for artificial intelligence is not going to happen by itself. Like I said, if and now that the profits of the private sector is being impacted, naturally you can expect the private sector to do more in terms of artificial intelligence advocacy, but the public sector should still take the lead in this. It's critical for the public sector to take the lead and take the initiative and provide direction in terms of what the advocacy and communication strategy for artificial intelligence initiatives and the technology generally should be. There must be that policy like that. But let's come back to the issue of democratizing artificial intelligence. Now, when you democratize artificial intelligence, using the examples of data center, to illustrate the points, for instance, one of the things we should begin to do is to ensure that even the technology companies themselves begin to, do a wifing engagement with the locals if they want to build technology centers. Wifing there meaning what is in it for me. It's important to let them know, for instance, that look, we are not just here to take your jobs, we are also here to create jobs, right? For every data center that we create, X amount of jobs are being, generated. This is what is in it for you as a community. And it's also important, for instance, for them to begin to, when I say them now, for the technology companies to begin to do more measurements. Of course, government should also take the lead in this, right? The public sector should take the lead in this. But collaborating with the private sector, it's important to do more monitoring and evaluation and generate the statistics that they need to counter the wrong perceptions, right? The inaccurate perceptions, or the perceptions that are no longer correct. I need to say that again. Like in the case of the data centers, there was a time when data centers were actually, threatening electricity in some areas, right? Especially when it came to water consumption. And as it is now, it has been said that the antagonism towards the construction of such data centers has cost, I think, about $100 billion worth of projects. $100 billion. This is what the data indicates. The data indicates that about $100 billion worth of projects have actually been, more or less shelved aside I think in America specifically, because of the protest against data centers. We've shared some specific examples of this over the months, right, including in the producer program. And as of now, the statistics indicate that about cumulative total of $100 billion worth of data centers projects have had to be, shelved aside more or less because of these protests. Now, has this brought value? I believe so. I believe, for instance, that these protests have compelled the modernization of data centers. I believe that part of the reason why we are now having data centers that are doing more with less water is because of these protests, right? So democratization is important. Democratization will lead to efficiency, right? But as part of democratizing, it's also important, like I said, to let them know, to let the communities know, to let the antagonists of artificial intelligence who are afraid of what artificial intelligence will do to jobs and will do to an environment and will do to electricity and so on, let them know what is in it for them. It's time to begin to communicate more holistically. It's time to have an artificial intelligence, advocacy and communication strategy. I'm going to say that again. It's time for policy, for government to begin to, take the lead with artificial intelligence communication strategy. By the way, we had a program in 2022, a webinar in Amogate, and we had, I remember, a state representative from the state of Pennsylvania in the United States, who graciously spoke at that webinar. And we also had another lady, I think Miss Joy Hunter, who had worked with the Obama administration in implementing artificial, I think, technology policies then, and part of what I remember Miss Joy Hunter said even then was that the communication about the benefits of artificial intelligence must be simplified. This was 2022, 4 years ago. She emphasized the need to, sell the benefits of it, to explain it comprehensively and very, very understandable in a manner that the everyday person can relate with. 4 years ago, she was already saying, based on her experience in government, that poor communication of artificial intelligence benefits could, kind of stir up some antagonism if we're not careful. And now we are seeing that play out. By the way, if you want to watch the snippet of what Ms. Joyce Hunter shared, you can check up our YouTube, our LinkedIn page, our Facebook page, our Instagram, where we shared the snippet of what Ms. Joyce Hunter said on that webinar recently. So you can scroll through our LinkedIn, our Instagram, and our Facebook pages. You will see the snippet. But what is the point here? Government needs to have a clear artificial intelligence advocacy and communication strategy. I'm going to say that again. Government must articulate in different nations an artificial intelligence advocacy and communication strategy. I think I'm going to take a quick break here and we'll be back shortly. Thank you for staying with us.
At Armor Gates Training, we believe professional development should do more than inform. It should transform how people work, lead, and deliver results. That's why we support organizations through conceptual insight, practical learning, and performance evaluation right at the intersection of leadership, strategy, and institutional transformation. Our approach focuses on practical learning format that professionals can immediately apply in their workplace. At Armor Gate, we don't teach theory alone. We equip participants with real-world insight drawn from almost 2 decades of organizational transformation experience. Our programs combine multiple learning methods designed for real-time measurable results. Through seminars, we facilitate deep conversation on key subjects. Using group exercises, participants collaborate, reflect, and think strategically. With case studies, they then sharpened analytical and decision-making skills using real industry scenarios. Through relevant videos, we spark insightful discussions using relatable real-life context. All in all, every participant develops an individual work plan, ensuring the learning turns into real action after the program. Our training programs are hosted in world-class venues across global cities, including Addis Ababa, Nairobi, Mombasa, Cape Town, Dubai, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, London, Florida, and Washington, D.C. Let's work with you to turn learning into your organization's growth. For more inquiries, call +234 807 9574 151 or WhatsApp +1 610 504 6026. Visit www.thearmorgate.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Armorgate. Armorgate Training, transforming knowledge, interaction, and growth.
You're welcome back. This is still your program, Implementing Artificial Intelligence Optimally in Organizations and Nations, on your favorite management radio station, Amogate Radio Communications, and I remain your host, Togo Modara, saying thank you for staying with us. Thank you for staying with us all through the quarter. Thank you for staying with us for half year 1 2026, and thank you for staying with us on this particular final closing episode of the program. So we're looking at democratizing artificial intelligence, right? And we've been on this segment of the program for the last 3 episodes. This is the closing segment of the program, as well as the closing episode of the program. So what do we, need to do to ensure that we throw that policy lifeline to the artificial intelligence technology? One of the things we must do, we're still coming back to communication, is to communicate the benefits of artificial intelligence probably more than anything that again. One of the things we need to do to throw the policy lifeline to artificial intelligence technology is to communicate the benefits of the technology probably more than the risks, or at the very minimum, balanced communication, right? The reason why I'm saying communicate the benefits more than the risk, don't misunderstand me, is not to present a false picture. No, it's to balance it, because in recent times, we seem to have had an over-communication of the risks. So to balance it, it may be time to also be talking about the benefits. For instance, if people know that artificial intelligence is helping their health outcomes or the health outcomes of their loved ones, they are likely to probably be a bit more open to the technology. I'll give you an example. Right now, we are having more precise surgeries, right, as a result of the intervention of artificial intelligence. All right. So if people know that their loved ones are likely to survive cancer more because of the impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning and pattern recognition, and these things are helping to identify the patterns, in previous non-successful surgeries and prevent it in current surgeries, they are probably likely to resist the data center construction in their backyard less, right? The NIMBYism, and NIMBYism, for instance, has grown in certain areas. NIMBYism is coined from NIMBY, which means not in my backyard. Right? People are saying no to data centers in their backyard, but that's probably because they haven't connected that data center to improve health outcomes for them and their loved ones. Let's talk about reading. For a long time, there's been the concern about whether artificial intelligence is going to dampen the critical thinking skills of our young ones, right? So if people now know that, well, artificial intelligence may not be so bad. A recent study was done, and the recent study found that maybe students using artificial intelligence when learning how to write may not be a bad one. Maybe we can adapt artificial intelligence to ensure that it doesn't dampen their critical thinking skills, right? A professor of English at Iowa State University and an associate director of the Student Innovation Center in Iowa State University, Abraham Anders, right? That's the name of the professor. He did some research and is saying that artificial intelligence may actually inspire a different type of critical thinking, right? For a long time, the concern has been that artificial intelligence can kill critical thinking, but based on this research, right, this recent research, the data is beginning to suggest that instead of killing critical thinking completely, students using artificial intelligence when learning how to write may actually inspire a different type of critical thinking. Right now, if they continue with this research, right, and we see further outcomes, maybe in a longitudinal study, we observe over a period of time, and we see what the data suggests. Maybe the more people know that, no, it's not to be feared after all, but it has its own benefits, perhaps they are likely to be more open to that data center being in their backyard, right? So maybe they're likely to move from the NIMBYism to YIMBYism. Instead of saying not in my backyard, maybe they will start saying yes in my backyard. So we need to show how artificial intelligence can have positive impacts on health outcomes, and educational outcomes. We've talked a lot in previous programs about the impact of artificial intelligence on even defense, right? The whole of Iran was probably fought to a large extent electronically. Drones and counter drones, we kept reading of it during the war. It's happening already in Ukraine. Ukraine had learned some lessons, and we saw some of those lessons, incorporated during the Iran war. We saw the Middle East also hitting back, some parts of the Middle East hitting back with their counter drones. We also saw that Iran, for instance, was said to have been using cheaper counter drones than the United States. So a lot is happening even in the area of defense with artificial intelligence. So if people know that, well, that data center is actually going to protect your nation, it's going to protect the sovereignty of your nation, probably they are likely to be more open to it. So we need to begin to gather more data. Very, very important, because when we talk about communication here, we are not talking about propaganda. I need to make that clear, right? We're talking about taking the facts, taking the insights we have gotten from the data to begin to show how artificial intelligence is improving, their health outcomes, their educational outcomes, and of course, the security of their nation too. Let's go to another area that I think is important, that we need to throw the policy lifeline to the artificial intelligence technology. I think that in planning, right, this is very critical. I think that in planning, it's important to begin to plan the democratization into the technology. I need to say that again. I think that policy needs to help the private sector to plan the democratization, because let's take a simple example of the jobs, right? So for every 8,000 jobs, for instance, that Meta probably takes off because it has invested more in artificial intelligence, right? Meta, by the way, is the owner of Facebook and Instagram, right? Every 8,000 jobs that Meta takes off, how is policy guiding the process? How is policy helping them to support, for instance, with things like wage insurance, right? So if people know that, yes, they are going to take away some jobs, but there's going to be wage insurance. Meta is contributing to wage insurance that the government will use to support those who are initially out of jobs while they are prepared for other jobs. Because like my colleague, Dr. Ogushana, would always say on our programs, she is an expert in economics. Dr. Ogushana will always say that what you want to avoid is structural unemployment. And structural unemployment is a situation where the available jobs do not match the available skills, right? So based on that, on Amogate, we've been consistently advocated for an intentional preparation for artificial intelligence migration. I need to say that again. Based on the principle of structural unemployment, we have been consistently advocating, especially in our artificial intelligence programs, for the intentional preparation of artificial intelligence migration. So if organizations are going to lay off, people, we also, government, I say we now, policymakers, and those of us that advise policymakers like we do in Amogate, need to sit down with organizations, say, you need to plan this. This is all the things that those who are advocating against artificial intelligence have been complaining about. They've been complaining about the unplanned migration to artificial intelligence, unplanned from the perspective of the worker, unplanned from the perspective of the worker who has given 20 years of his or her life, 25 years of his or her life to an organization, staying there loyally. How are you preparing such workers for the migration to artificial intelligence? You have enough prior information as an organization to know what you want to do. You know the jobs that are likely to be created. I'll give you a simple example. Right now, it's being said that the demand for certain jobs like welders and engineers and those jobs that are required to build data centers is on the rise. Now we are also talking about quantum computing, right? That quantum computing is also going to be in higher demand. We're talking about chips making. right? What you use, what artificial intelligence depends heavily on is chips. So the demand for chips, CHIPS, is also going to be high. I was watching a video recently where a Chinese professional was talking about, chips markets, even in a place like Nigeria, in Western in Africa, in Western Africa, right? So there are going to be other kind of jobs being created. The government, the policymakers, the regulators now need to mandate, in my opinion, intentional and prepared migration to artificial intelligence. I believe that organizations must be compelled to prepare those that will be exiting. Maybe take them through a 6 months training, or even if you take them out, then for the next 6 months, keep them on their wages. And for those next 6 months, begin to prepare them for the jobs that they can migrate towards. This is a place for human capital policy, Department of Labor in places like the United States, Ministries of Labor in places like Nigeria, to begin to say, okay, let's anticipate this migration, this artificial intelligence migration from Europe to Asia to America. Let's have a plan, a very intentional, strategic, policy plan to migrate and prepare the talent that will be eased out of some jobs for other jobs that are being created. Wow. I think this may be a good place to wrap it up. There's so much to be said, but I believe we get the drift already. We get the thrust of it. We must democratize artificial intelligence, and it's time to throw a policy lifeline. There must be an intentionally articulated artificial intelligence communication and advocacy. Very, very important. It's time to, save the reputation of artificial intelligence. And we can't do this with propaganda. We must do this with data, with fact. We just must make sure that the rumors are not louder than fact. We must be intentional about that. We must also be intentional about ensuring that people are prepared for the exits they may need to make from certain jobs, to ensure that they are competitive for the other kinds of jobs that artificial intelligence is creating. The job apocalypse needs to be rebranded. We need to let them know that, no, it's not really a job apocalypse. It's more or less like a job recreating. We are not exiting people out of jobs without creating other jobs. Artificial intelligence is creating other jobs, but that bridge must also be intentionally, connected. There must be that bridge between the jobs that are being created and the current skills of people who are being exited out of the jobs. Well, I remember as a child when I used to be a debater, I used to say when I finished that I hope with these few points of mine, I've been able to convince you and not to confuse you, and I will state my case. Well, on this note, I hope that with this point, oh my God, we've been able to convince you that we can implement artificial intelligence optimally in organizations and nations, and that is what we should do. Well, we're here for you at Amogate as nations, as institutions, as organizations. If you want to set up an institution for the optimal implementation of artificial intelligence in your nation, we are here to partner with you, to collaborate with you. If you want to set up a department in your institution to ensure, a seamless transition to AI, we are also here to work with you. If you need AI consulting, that's our strength. We've been doing this for years. We're here to work with you on that. You can send us a mail, contact@amogate.org. You can reach us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. You can also go to our website, www.theamogate.org, and fill our contact form. We are always here to support you. This is what we do, and this is what we also have demonstrable and proven institutional competence. Thank you very much for being with me on this journey. I truly and deeply appreciate you. We'll take a break for about 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll be back next quarter to continue with another Amogate Radio Communications program. Until we see you, for those of us in the United States, happy 250th. Have a wonderful, amazing, unique Independence Day celebration on the 4th of July. For those of us in other nations of the world, also take time to reflect. It's half year 2. Here already, take time to plan and reflect, look at what has worked or what hasn't worked, and get ready for the other half of 2026. Thank you so much again. We can never appreciate you enough for being with us on this journey. Take good care of yourselves and have a good one.
Amogate, founded in 2008 out of a desire to build transgenerational structures for organizations, institutions, and nations. We have worked with large businesses, international development organizations, and public sector ministries and agencies. Armorgate. Our uniqueness is that we do not just work for you, we work with you. For example, we do not leave you to the task after sourcing talent that will help the new hire settle into robust leadership development programs. We are technical experts in advising and supporting institutions on strategy and leadership, artificial intelligence, strategic human resource management, public sector reform, finance, audit and tax, FAT, and strategic communications. We do all this and more out of a desire to transform nations through institutions and organizations. For further inquiries, email contact@thearmorgate.org or call +234 810 999 6666, +234 807 957 4151, and +161 0504 6026. www.thearmorgate.org. Armorgate, building to endure and transforming nations through institutions and organizations.